माधव कुंज विहारी जय राधा माधव कुंज बिहारी गोपीजना वल्लभ गिरिवरधारी जय गोपीजना वल्लभ गिरिवरधारी यशोदानन्दना व्रजजनरञ्जना यशोदानन्दना व्रजजनरञ्जना यशोदानन्दना व्रजजनरञ्जना यशोदानन्दना व्रजजनरञ्जना यमुनातीरावनचारी यमुनातीरावनचारी जय राधा माधव कुंज बिहारी गोपीजना वल्लभ गिरिवरधारी यशोदानन्दना व्रजजनरञ्जना यशोदानन्दना व्रजजनरञ्जना यमुनातीरावनचारी यमुनातीरावनचारी जय राधा माधव कुंज बिहारी हरे कृष्णा 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 हरे 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 राम 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 हरे हरे Krishna Krishna Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ram 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ram 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Ram Ram Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ram 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 Hare 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 Krishna Krishna Hare 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 Ram 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 Hare 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 Krishna Krishna Hare 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 Ram 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 Hare 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 Krishna Krishna Hare 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 Rama Ram Ram Hare Hare Radha Gopinath Radhe Jaya Radha Govinda Radhe Nitai Gaur Hari Bol Nitai Gaur Hari Bol Jaya Jaya Prabhupada Jaya Jaya Prabhupada Jaya Jaya Prabhupada Jaya Jaya Prabhupada Vishnupada Paramahansa Parivrajacharya Stotra Shishmadabhe Charanarvinda Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada Maharaj Jai Om Vishnupada Paramahansa Parivrajacharya Stotra Shishmadabhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Goswami Maharaj Prabhupada Ki Jai Shri Rup Sanatana Bhatta Raghunath Shri Jiva Gopala Bhatta Das Raghunath Shri Goswami Prabhupada Ki Jai Namacharya Shri Haridas Thakur Ki Jai प्रेम से कहो श्री कृष्ण चैतन्य प्रभु नित्यानंद श्री अद्वैत गदाधर श्रीवास आदि गौर भक्तवृंद की जय श्री श्री राधा कृष्ण गोप गोपीनाथ श्याम कुंड राधा कुंड गिरि गोवर्धन की जय श्री वृंदावन धाम की जय श्री नवद्वीप मायापुर धाम की जय पुरुषोत्तम क्षेत्र श्री जगन्नाथपुरी धाम की जय गंगा मई की जय यमुना मई की जय भक्ति देवी की जय तुलसी महारानी की जय समवेत भक्त वृंद की जय गौर प्रेमानंदी all glories to the assembled devotees all glories to the assembled devotees all glories to the assembled devotees All glories, all glories, all glories to Sri Guru and Sri Prabhupada. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Narayanam Namaskrityam Naram Chaiva Narottamam Devim Saraswatim Vyasam Tato Jayamudire Nashtaprayeshu Abhadreshu Nityam Bhagavata Sevaya Bhagavati Uttama Shloke Bhaktir Bhavati Naishtaki Krishnaya Vasudevaya Devaki Nandanaya Cha Nandagopa Kumaraya Govindaya Namo Namaha Govindaya Namo Namaha. Hare Krishna, reading from Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 1, Chapter 6, entitled Conversation between Narada and Vyasadeva. Text 11. Sputanjana padamstatra purakramar vajakaran khetakarbata vatischa vananya upavanani cha Svitanjana padamstatra purakramar vajakaran khetakarbata vatischa vananya upavanani cha Svitanjana padamstatra Purakrama Prajakara Khetakarvata Vatischa Vananya Upavanani cha
Vitanjana Padam Tatra Purakrama Prajakara Khetakarvata Vatischa
Fitanjana padamstatra Purakrama Vajakaran Khetakarvata Vatischa Anani Upavanani cha. After this, Svitanjana padamstatra Purakrama Vrajakaran Khedakharvata Vatischa Vanani Upavanani cha. Svitan, very flourishing. Janpadan, metropolises. Tatra, there. Pura, towns. Gram, villages. Vraja, big farms. Akaran, mineral fields, mines. Khet, agricultural lands. Kharvata, valleys. Vatiha, flower gardens. Cha, and. Vanani, forests. Upavanani, nursery gardens. Cha, and. Translation and purport by His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada. After my departure, I passed through many flourishing metropolises, towns, villages, animal farms, mines, agricultural lands, valleys, flower gardens, nursery gardens, and natural forests. Purport. Man's activities in agriculture, mining, farming, industries, gardening, etc., were all on the same scale as they are now, even previous to the present creation. And the same activities will remain as they are even in the next creation. After many hundreds of millions of years, one creation is started by the law of nature, and the history of the universe repeats itself practically in the same way. The mundane wranglers waste time with archaeological excavations without searching into the vital necessities of life. After getting an impetus in spiritual life, Sri Narad Muni, even though a mere child, did not waste time for a single moment with economic development. Although he passed towns and villages, mines and industries, he continually went on to progressive spiritual emancipation. Srimad Bhagavatam is the repetition of history which happened some hundreds of millions of years ago. As it is said herein, only the most important factors of history are picked up to be recorded in this transcendental literature. Om Ajnanatimirandhasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshurunmlitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namah Shri Chaitanya Manobhishtam Sthapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamayam Dadati Swapadantikam Namo Om Vishnupadaya Krishna Presthaya Bhutale Srimate Bhakti Vedanta Swaminiti Namine Namaste Saraswate Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Paschatya Deshatarine He Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dinabandhu Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostute Namo Mahavadanyaya Krishna Prema Pradayate Krishnaya Krishna Chaitanya Namine Gauratishe Namah Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shivas Adi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare Vanchakalpadrubhescha Kripa Sindhubhayeva Patitanam Pavnebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namah Sfitanjana Statra Puragrama Vrajakaran Kheta Karvata Vatischa Vananya Upavanani Cha. After my departure, I passed through many flourishing metropolises, towns, villages, animal farms, mines, agricultural land, valleys, flower gardens, nursery gardens, and natural forests. Hare Krishna. So an interesting experience that Narad Muni is relating of himself. And definitely when you experience something, you share it with more fervor and it really hits the heart. Taking this opportunity to start with glorifying Srila Prabhupada and his works, because this is the 125th birth anniversary of Srila Prabhupada. And also glorifying Srimad Bhagavatam as Prabhupada stated in the purport. And of course many more points in the purport. So in Chaitanya Charitamrita, Antilila, this is first chapter, verse number 195. It says, Kim kavyena kavestasya kim kandena dhanusmatah parasya hridahe lagnam na ghurnyati yachiraha. What is the use of a bowman's arrow? And what is the use of a poet's poetry if it just not pierces the heart but also makes the head spin? So this is what has been told about the poetry of a poet. It not just pierces the heart, but it should also make the head spin. And this is what Srila Prabhupada's words are. when you read the translation, the purport, they not only hit the heart, but they also make your head really reel. The way Prabhupada has written and the way Prabhupada has given his purports. Many times we take many things casually. And many times, at least for me it happens, is with Prabhupada's words. But the more you read scrutinizingly and the more you read attentively, the more you are able to relish it. The more you are able to actually penetrate deep into the insights that Srila Prabhupada is giving. Last week, I think our Prime Minister was glorifying and he was quoting the former Prime Minister and saying that what Srila Prabhupada did was nothing less than a Chamatkar. And this word in Sanskrit, Prabhupada translates as wondrous or astonishing. So Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur has written this very interesting book called Chamatkar Chandrika, the blazing moonlight of wondrous pastimes. And I was just thinking that how it really applies to what Srila Prabhupada has done, his activities, his words. They're all really astonishing. And the more you think about it and the more you read and hear him, the more it gets astonishing. Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur, describing the Rasa Tattvas, quotes this shloka. I'm not sure if it's his own, but might be. Vititya bhavana vartma yas chamatkara bharabhu hridi sat ujjvale badham swadatte sa rasomataha. So he's describing what is rasa, mellow in devotional service. He says that which is beyond imagination, heavy with wonder, and relished in the heart, shining with goodness, such is known as rasa. So he says, and then he further goes on to elaborate, the essence of rasa is rasesara chamatkara. That is that which causes astonishment is actually the essence of rasa. So the more you read Srila Prabhupada's words, the more you hear him speak, the more you're astonished with his spiritual insight, depth, clarity, and preciseness. Here we have the description of Narad Muni actually being inspired by the words of Bhaktivedanta and then going into the forest in search of the Supreme Absolute Truth. Similarly, the Vedic literatures are also compared to a dense forest, and they can actually become a dense forest of delusion if you get too focused on the fruitive activities that they try to convey. I think it comes in the Bhagavad Gita also, Yatte Moho Kalilam, 2nd chapter, where it's where one can get bewildered by the fiery words of Vedas and get lost in this forest of delusion. But at the same time, the Chaitanya Charitamrita compares it to a pleasing, the Krishna's pastimes to a pleasing pond filled with lotuses. Actually, it gives a very beautiful verse. It says, Krishna Leela Amrita Sar Tar Shata Shatadhar Dasha Dike Vahe Yaha Hite Se Chaitanya Leela Hoy Sarovar Akshay Manohansa Charhat Hate. The pastimes of Lord Krishna are the essence of all nectar. And that nectar is flowing in hundreds of rivers in all directions. But interestingly, for the pastimes of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, the pastimes of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu are an eternal reservoir, and one is advised to let his mind swim like a swan on this transcendental lake. The pastimes of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu are compared to a lake. The rivers are supposed to actually come forth through a lake. So one can really absorb or drown himself in the pastimes of Krishna, the river-like pastimes of Krishna, if he takes the shelter of the lake of the pastimes of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. Narad Muni, when he actually travels to this forest, this is what the description is all about. And Prabhupada gives some very interesting points about traveling. Of course, I'll try to just summarize those, and the later speakers can elaborate on them. And when he starts traveling, he experiences the variegatedness of Lord's creation in its various forms. He comes across dangerous animals and dangerous, treacherous pathways. But finally, he comes across a pond where he dips himself. And after having purified himself, he feels invigorated by bathing in that pond, and then sits under the shade of a banyan tree, where then he meditates on the Supreme Personality of Godhead as has been directed by the Bhaktivedanta. And then in the lotus of his heart, he actually envisions the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Similarly, if you are able to bathe in this lake of the pastimes of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, follow in the footsteps of Goswamis, the directions that they have given, bathe in the lake of service to the Vaishnavas and the path that is laid down by the Goswamis, and then sit in the shelter of the tree of Srimad Bhagavatam, the desire tree of Srimad Bhagavatam. No doubt each one of us can experience the Lord residing in our hearts. Here, Prabhupada, I do not know where to start with, but Prabhupada is, mentioning, in one sense, the mundane wranglers who dabble in archaeological aspects without knowing what the goal of life is. Very interesting, and it may seem that Prabhupada is, in one sense, critical of archaeological service. But if you look into the history of the Gaudiya Vaishnava lineage, and in fact, even Srila Prabhupada himself, Prabhupada himself established one Bhaktivedanta Swami charity. The fundamental goals or aspects that this charity envisioned was, in one sense, re-establishing historical places in the Gauda Bhumi. If you see from what the 6 Goswamis did, and we have this instruction of Srila Chaitanya Mahaprabhu to Rupa and Sanatan specifically. And it says, Tumi kariya bhakti shastre na prachara, mathuraya lupta tirthara kariya uddhar, vrindavane Krishna seva, Vaishnava achar, bhakti smriti shastra kari prachar. This is to Sanatan Goswami. And similar instructions he gives to Rup Goswami in Puri. And he says, Mathura Mahatmaya Shastra Sangra Kariya, Lupta Tirtha Prakata Kaila Vaneta Brahmiya. Shastra Dishte Kaila Lupta Tirthara Uddhara Vrindavane Kaila Shri Murtara Seva Prachar. Vraja Yei Rasa Shastra Kariya Nirupana Lupta Tirtha Sabataha Kariya Pracharana. So he's actually giving these 4 instructions to Sri Rupa and Sanatana Goswami. One of them is actually says, please excavate the lost holy places in Vrindavan. It's something to do with archaeology. And very interesting, Prabhupada actually, when, in relation to Sanatana Goswami, he says, Mathura Mahatmaya Shastra Sangra Kariya. He says, and he translates Mathura Mahatmaya Shastra as some books about archaeological excavations in Mathura. So, interestingly, these 4 instructions that Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu is giving to the Goswamis of Vrindavan, specifically Sri Rupa and Sanatana Goswamis, that please excavate these holy places. And please elaborate on the Bhakti Shastras, compile their different Shastras and elaborate on the Bhakti aspect of it. Please preach about it and establish deity worship in Sri Vrindavan Dham. If you see from Bhaktivinoda Thakur's time, the Bhaktivinoda Dhara, especially of Bhaktivinoda Thakur, Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Rai Thakur, Srila Prabhupada literally followed in the footsteps of Goswamis. Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur actually excavated the lost place of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. And this he did by studying the archaeological maps that were present during those times. And when he started digging at that place, he actually found this deity of Adokshaja, Vishnu, which later he confirmed with the historical aspects and texts that were available with him, that this was the deity that Jagannath Mishra was actually worshipping. So that is how he established the lost place of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. And Prabhupada, in fact, constituted the Bhaktivedanta Charity Trust exactly with this as one of its objectives, to establish the lost places of the pastimes of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu and his devotees, exactly in line with what Rupa and Sanatana Goswami did with Vrindavan. And very interesting, because these archaeological surveys and the historical records give very interesting aspects about what the Goswamis did at that time, and how Srila Prabhupada and the following acharyas are exactly falling in their line. And that, in one sense, increases your appreciation for Srila Prabhupada. Yes, his words are one aspect, and we'll dwell into them. But even his activities, you know. Indradhura Maharaj actually, you know, in some way has tied up with the Vrindavan Research Institute, and he's taking a series, a long series, I think he's been taking for a month, on the what he has named as the hidden pastimes of Govindji. And there he's narrating from many of the archaeological excavations and the historical records that he has found in the Vrindavan Research Institute, describing in detail how Rup Goswami comes across the deity of Govindev. And very interesting insights. It not only increases the appreciation of what the Goswamis were doing, but also of what Srila Prabhupada and the next acharyas actually did. Exactly in line with what the Goswamis were doing. Srila Rupa Goswami was given these 4 instructions, and following these instructions, both Rupa and Sanatan, it is said, would beg for not more than 7 houses a day. And whatever they would receive, they would, as Madhukari, then they would proceed to, you know, continue with their bhajan. On one such occasion, Srila Rupa Goswami, after receiving the alms, started doing his Vrindavan Parikrama. And being on the Vrindavan Parikrama, he suddenly started feeling a lot of separation from Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, thinking it's been long that Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu has not written. And we can see from its records that Rupa Goswami, though he was living like a traveling mendicant, he was in constant touch with Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. There was a constant flow of letters from Jagannath Puri, from Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, and a constant reply from Sanatana and Rupa Goswamis about what they were doing. And Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's specific instructions about what and how they should move with the mission of establishing what he had instructed them. And with this sudden separation in his heart, he just was stunned, you know, and he took shade of a tree and just sat down there, and was incessantly weeping in this separation of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. And while he was feeling this separation, he immediately composed one of the Ashtakams glorifying Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. It's said as it was one of the Prathama Ashtakams that he wrote glorifying Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. During that time, and this is very interesting, there came a cowherd man whose name was Govindas. And this Govindas is supposed to have actually taken care of 500 cows who actually belonged to Rupa Goswami. So Rupa Goswami, though he was a traveling mendicant, he had given most of his wealth, he had distributed it to the Brahmanas and to charity to the Brahmanas, to the temples and all, and 25% to his relatives. But 25%, if you remember, he had kept as emergency. So some of that emergency fund was used by Sanatan Goswami to escape. What did he do with the rest of the funds? Because he had a lot of money. It was a boatload. So some of that money actually he used for taking care of the cows. And they were like 500 cows that he had in his... It was... Actually, he was not directly, in one sense, involved with, taking care of the cows. But he had given this money to some cowherdsmen to take care of these cows. And why did he do that? Because the Sadhana Dipika of Radha Krishna Das Goswami, who was the disciple of, or who actually came in the lineage of Haridas Goswami, who was the main priest of Govindev, he writes that Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, besides these 4 instructions, specifically gave more 2 instructions to Srila Rupa Goswami. And that was to specifically look for the lost deity of Govindev. So yes, he wanted that the different lost pastimes should be excavated, but his specific instruction to Rupa Goswami was to look for the lost deity of Govindev and to take care of the Akinchana Vaishnavas who were absorbed in the holy name in Vrindavan, to take care of these Vaishnavas. Following that instruction of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, Srila Rupa Goswami actually took care of 500 cows whose milk was given to take care of these Vaishnavas. That is the way he was serving these Vaishnavas. And Govindas was one of the cowherd men who was actually taking care of these 500 cows. So when he came across Rupa Goswami in such state, he was taken aback. And he could realize that Rupa Goswami is feeling a lot of separation from Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. At that time, the Lord in his heart inspired, and he told Rupa Goswami, well, Rupa Goswami, one thing I wanted to share for you for months, that there is one of these cows in this Goshala that we have, who has been pouring for months, not for months, actually for years, its milk at this specific place. So it was not just a question of days that this cow had been pouring milk at that specific place in Yogpit. It had been years that this cow would go at this place and his udder would start actually just pouring milk incessantly there. And it was on this day that this cowherd man, seeing the state of Rupa Goswami, was inspired to tell this incident to Rupa Goswami. And Rupa Goswami, when he heard this description of what this cowherd man was saying, he instantly became jubilant. Somehow the Lord in his heart inspired him to understand what it meant. And the Brajvasi says, Govinda. Vinda actually means meditation in Braj Bhasha. So his meditation was broken by this description of this cow, Govinda. And by this indication, Sri Rupa Goswami understood that this is where Govindev actually lies. And this is how I can please Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu by excavating this place. So immediately he requested that please convey the message to all the well-abled Brajvasis to come on this place tomorrow. And in this way, all the Brajvasis, well-built Brajvasis, came on that the next day, assembled there, and started excavating at this place. Now, the same, the pastime is quite in line with what Madhavendra Puri actually came across when searching the lost deity of Gopalji. But it was not so easy for searching Govindev. They actually dug nearly 5 stories down to find the top part of Srila Govindev. It was just not like, that it was some things they had to just dig for some time. 5 stories down, literally, that they had to dig. That is where they came across the top part of Srila Govindev. And as soon as the deity was found, Srila Rupa Goswami immediately paid his Dadvat Pranams. I'm actually rushing across. Indra Maharaj actually narrates this in about 9 episodes of 40 minutes each. I'm just taking some few episodes. And I'm not actually going to go into too many details, but I'm just trying to make the point how the ecological excavations can actually help relish how the Goswamis were living. And as soon as he finds this lost deity of Govindev, he falls flat, he offers his pranams. And then the Brajvasis ask, so what do you want to name this deity? He says, well, this deity is Govindev, which has been established by Brajanath. And I'm naming him Govindev also because when this news was broken to me by this Gwal Bal, I was actually meditating on the Gopal Gayatri, looking at the east. And Govind means, because this deity was indicated by go, that is by the behavior of a cow, that is also why this deity has to be named Govindev. And there is an elaborate description of how Srila Rupa Goswami on that day performed an elaborate abhishek, which lasted for about 4 hours to this Govindev deities. And then, of course, an elaborate description of what was offered to Govindev, how Govindev was decorated. Very interesting. If anyone wants, you can hear the lecture and actually relish how the whole detailed thing was done. But we can move forward and see that how, after the deities was established, Srila Rupa Goswami was quite happy, having a elaborate worship, which was basically maintained by the natural ingredients that were available at that time. To decorate Srila Govindev, the gunjas and the Vajanti beads and creepers and tulsi. And even in his offerings, simple offerings of khichdi, shak, fruits, sattu and shikarani, But it so happened that Man Singh at that time, who was in the court of Akbar, who had taken over after Humayun, Humayun, interesting, also knew about Rup Goswami. And he had issued a farman that Rup Goswami's cows can graze wherever they want. There are no restrictions to be applied to the grazing of the cows that Rup Goswami holds, and no taxes to be applicable to them. So Rup Goswami was quite famous. And Man Singh, at that time, who was in the court of Akbar, was requested by Akbar that there is a rebellion in Bengal, and please go and quash that rebellion. So Srila Man Singh was, I think, in somewhere in the west in his expeditions in expanding the kingdom of Akbar. But he had, while this request came, or in fact a directive came from Akbar that he should go to Bengal to quash this rebellion, he thought that he should go to Vrindavan, take the blessings of Govind there, and then move forward. And at that time, and this was a suggestion that was also given by his ministers. He himself was an ardent devotee of Krishna. So they knew that, and they suggested, why don't you go and take blessings of Govind there before you go on this expedition, and also of Rup Goswami. So then, Man Singh actually comes to Vrindavan, has darshan of Govind Dev, and then goes and meets Rup Goswami. Very interesting. When he meets Rup Goswami, he immediately recognizes him. He says, "Oh, you are Dabir Khas from the court of Nawab Hussain Shah." He could immediately recognize that because Rup Goswami also as a minister in Nawab Hussain Shah was very famous, and Man Singh knew the in and out and the length and breadth of whole of India, because he was always on a continuing expedition on behalf of Akbar. It said he actually won about 67 wars on behalf of Akbar. So he knew in and outs of who is the king, who are the prominent ministers, so he was able to immediately recognize that this Rup Goswami is not different from Dabir Khas in the court of Nawab Hussain Shah. But when actually he was having darshan of Govind Dev, he was so inspired by the beauty of Govind Dev, there and there itself he took a vow that Govind Dev, it's my prayer to you that if you help me in this expedition, to win this expedition to Bengal, I promise, when I come back, I will build a beautiful temple for you. But he did not disclose this heart to Rup Goswami. He just made this vow in front of Govind Dev. And taking the blessings of Srila Rup Goswami, he left from there. In the meantime, Rup Goswami also felt a bit burdened by his worship to Govind Dev. And he wrote to Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu that though I have been worshipping Govind Dev, days are just passing by, and I'm not able to execute your main task of, collecting these, compiling these Vedic references in terms of explaining what the mellows of bhakti are. And in this way, my main task has become, has taken a back seat. So could you kindly help and send someone who can help me with this worship of Govind Dev? So when Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, when he received this message from Srila Rupa Goswami, he was undoubtedly very, very happy to know that Srila Rupa Goswami had finally been successful in finding this deity of Govind Dev. And he immediately requested Kashishwar Pandit to, go there and help Sri Rupa Goswami in worship of Govind Dev. Kashishwar Pandit was quite taken aback because he didn't want to leave Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's lotus feet. To alleviate his pain, Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu then gave a deity of Gaur Govind, which was actually being worshipped during that time in the temple of Jagannath. He actually took that deity from the temple and gave it to Kashishwar Pandit and said that this deity is not different from me. So Kashishwar Pandit, he comes to Vrindavan and helps Sri Rupa Goswami in the worship of Govind Dev. So then he actually starts worshipping, Sri Rupa Goswami in the meantime also finds the deity of Yogmaya and Vrindadevi. Vrindadevi finds in the nearby Brahmakund. So then he starts worshipping Govind Dev along with the Vrindadevi and Yogmaya and his own deity of Gaur Govind. In the meantime, Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu also requests Raghunath Bhatt Goswami to go to Vrindavan. And he specifically instructs him that Rup and Sanatana Goswami are compiling the literatures. So you don't write anything. Your service will be to actually glorify Krishna by reciting from Srimad Bhagavatam. So Raghunath Bhatt Goswami was given this specific service of reciting from Srimad Bhagavatam. So when Raghunath Bhatt Goswami comes to Vrindavan, he takes up this service of reciting from Srimad Bhagavatam. In fact, Rupa and Sanatana Goswamis do not speak much. They are very busy making these excavations and writing literatures. The service of speaking from Srimad Bhagavatam is specifically taken up by Raghunath Bhatt Goswami. And Rupa and Sanatana Goswamis actually attend his lectures. So we have a short description, and this is again from this historical records from the Vaishnav, from the Research Institute. And there it says, and this one of the Vaishnavas writes, and this is all research and historically validated, also by the Vaishnavas, so nothing to doubt about it. He says, so, and one of the instances when Raghunath Bhatt Goswami was speaking from Gopi Geet, there happened to be a Brahmin who came from South India. And when he was attending this lecture, he was mesmerized by the way Raghunath Bhatt Goswami was speaking on this Gopi Geet. But at the same time, he noticed that there was one Vaishnav who had a seat which was higher than that of Raghunath Bhatt Goswami. So he became very curious. Said, the speaker is supposed to have a higher seat. Who is this one in the audience that who has a higher seat from than the speaker of Srimad Bhagavatam? So he started asking the Vaishnavas, and they said, oh, he's Srila Rupa Goswami. And he saw that Rupa Goswami had closed his eyes as well and was in rapt attention. But he was hardly moving. So he got a bit curious, and he went very close to Rupa Goswami. And Rupa Goswami was hardly breathing. So, he took a cotton swab and kept it close to the nose of Rupa Goswami just to see, is he breathing or no? And the cotton swab hardly moved for about a danda, that is for about 24 minutes. And he was bewildered, But he knew that either this person has lost his life or he's gone into a trance. He didn't know what it is. And at that time, Raghunath Bhatt Goswami finished his lecture and says, Srila Govind Dev ki jai. And as soon as Raghunath Bhatt Goswami said Srila Govind Dev ki jai, Rupa Goswami breathed. And by his breath, by the heat of his breath, that cotton swab actually caught fire. It was because Srila Rupa Goswami was in such separation, he was experiencing such separation, that fire of separation actually burnt that cotton swab. So, of course, a lot of details, and I'm not going into it. But the point is, you get quite, these finer details actually help one to realize the activities of Rupa Goswami and appreciate how our acharyas are exactly in line. And Prabhupada was so concerned that the cows should be taken care of. Please enunciate this and spread this cow protection. Take care of the cows. Take care of the Vaishnavas. One of the aspects of this Bhaktivedanta Charity Trust was actually also not only to establish the historical places, but see how the Gaudiya, all the different Gaudiya maths can come together, how these Vaishnavas can be taken care of. So exactly in line with what the Goswamis were doing, exactly in line with what Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu had instructed. Of course, the primary aspect of Srila Prabhupada was to also translate the Srimad Bhagavatam in the English language. So the Goswamis excavated the holy places in Vrindavan and translated and actually compiled, not so much translated, but compiled these literatures mainly in Sanskrit and something in Bengali. But Srila Prabhupada, and especially the acharyas from Bhaktivinoda Thakur, Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Sai Thakur, up to Srila Prabhupada and further on, actually took these teachings to the Western world in the English language and focused on establishing the lost places of Navdeep Dham, the places related to Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu and his devotees. But exactly in line with what the Goswamis were doing, exactly in line. And we can see that the way they wrote the literatures. Actually, the first verse that I quoted, is what Ramanand Rai is saying about Srila Rupa Goswami's literature. How Srila Rupa Goswami's literature just not penetrates the heart, but actually makes the head spin. And that is exactly what we can say about how Srila Prabhupada has written his literatures. And just some glimpses that I'll be taking, whatever time permits. Many instances, and of course what flows from Prabhupada's literatures is the compassion that is so evident in his writings. And just something that I wanted to take, and I think it's from the 7th verse, the first verse of the 7th chapter of the 10th canto. And I'm just reading the translation just to give a glimpse, and many more examples, but I'll just take 2 or 3 examples. Try to understand. Sometimes we take it so easily of what Prabhupada is doing, and sometimes we feel, Prabhupada is sometimes overstating something, especially in terms of bhakti. But mind you, the more you read, the more you can appreciate how precise, how true Prabhupada is being to the original words. In fact, the Sanskrit that Prabhupada is translating is not easy to translate. And I'm working on the 5th canto. Just 5 chapters I wanted them to be translated. 5 chapters of the commentaries of the Acharyas. And Prabhupada actually requested that please look into the commentaries of the Acharyas when you're working on this project of understanding what the 5th canto is saying. In fact, Harikesh Prabhu was saying that Prabhupada, after he translated the 5th canto, wanted to actually redo it. He wanted to redo it in the sense that he really thought that it will not reach to the audience of today, and he wanted to present it in such a way that it clicks with the audience, the contemporary audience of today. So he requested that when you're researching into it, please look into the commentaries of the Acharyas. And the more I was trying to understand the commentaries of the Acharyas, the more I was able to appreciate that what Prabhupada has given is really unbelievable. It surpasses, I can't use the word surpasses, but it actually hits the bull's eye, especially with the contemporary audience. And, I was trying to request many of the Sanskrit scholars, and they were like HODs of Sanskrit universities, vice chancellors of Sanskrit universities. And when I gave them these translations, this translation to be done, just 5 chapters, some of 3rd canto, 2nd canto, and the 5th canto, and they were like, sorry, we can't do it. And the PhD scholars, sorry, we can't do it. So it's too difficult, and it's too technical, and the Sanskrit is too difficult to do it. And I then look for some professional, translators. Now you have professional translating companies who do this work, and some professional translators. 125 verses. What they quoted me. I mean, it won't be prudent to tell me at this time, not practical also to actually quote, but still just to highlight what Prabhupada has done. For 125 verses, 10 commentaries of the Acharyas, the minimum quote that I got was rupees 3 lakhs. Just 125 verses. And when I approached some of the really scholarly pundits in this, and they work for some companies, I'm not going to the details, but they charge $1,000 per hour. $1,000 per hour. And I said, okay, so how much will this take? How much time this will take? I said, I think minimum 200 hours to translate these 125 verses. So that was coming, to make the matter simpler for you, about 1.5 crore rupees just to translate 125 verses. So even if you materially try to evaluate what Srila Prabhupada has done, it comes to about 180 crore rupees. Just to, of course, you cannot materially evaluate what Srila Prabhupada has done, but just to give an idea of what Srila Prabhupada is doing. But it's much more than that. And mind you, he did this in a period of about 10 to 11 years. His main part actually came from 65 to 77. Before that was just the first canto that he had translated. So about 8 cantos in about 10 years, 11 years. 5 chapters, And they are struggling even to do 5 chapters after 2 months. They want at least 6 months to do 5 chapters. And it's not just one person who's doing it. It's a battery of people. It's like about 4 or 5 of them trying to do it at one time. So you can, just to give an appreciation of what Prabhupada is actually doing, And, Gaur Govind Maharaj was saying, when I was looking into Prabhupada's word-to-word translation of the Sanskrit, even I at one point felt, maybe the scholars, will actually criticize how Prabhupada is translating. So let me go to some really well-established scholars and try to get a feedback from them. And to make it short, the scholars actually just folded hands in front of Gaur Govind Maharaj, said, what Prabhupada has done with the English translations for the Sanskrit is unbelievable. His choice of words is unparalleled. It cannot get better than this. And it's not in the capacity of any ordinary person actually to do what Srila Prabhupada has done. Just to give you some examples, and this is the first verse of the 7th chapter of 10th canto. And it reads, King Parikshit said, my Lord Shukdev Goswami, all the various activities exhibited by the incarnations of the Supreme Personality of Godhead are certainly pleasing to the ear and to the mind. Simply by one's hearing of these activities, the dirty things in one's mind immediately vanish. This is the literal translation if you look into the word-to-word thing. Comma, it should be. And one gradually develops devotional service to the Supreme Lord, attachment for Him, and friendship with devotees who give us the contribution of Krishna consciousness. If you think it fitting, kindly speak about those activities of the Lord. This has to be the literary translation if you look into the word-to-word. But how Prabhupada translates, after this full stop of dirty things in one's minds immediately vanish, he puts a full stop. And he adds the following. Generally, we are reluctant to hear about the activities of the Lord. But Krishna's childhood activities are so attractive that they are automatically pleasing to the mind and ear. Thus, one's attachment for hearing about material things, which is the root cause of material existence, vanishes. It's nowhere there in the Sanskrit that is there. And one can easily criticize, it's not a literal translation. And Prabhupada could have given it in the purport. He didn't have to put it in the translation. But this highlights his the compassion that is actually overflowing from his heart. He's not sure, if his readers are really going to take the pain to actually go through his purports. If you really scrutinizingly read Prabhupada's purport, and I can vouch for this from my experience of the 5th canto. What he's doing is, when you go into the word-to-word translation of Sanskrit, he is giving a specific meaning. When you go into the translation, he's giving a specific meaning. When you read into the purport, he's giving a different meaning. But what he's trying to do is actually highlight all the important points that the acharyas are doing. But he's doing it differently. And he knows the type of audience that is actually going to go into the word-to-word, the type of audience that is going to read the translation, and the type of audience that is actually going to go into the purport. So just to make sure that anyone who reads this book gets the message, Prabhupada actually, his heart overflowing with compassion is giving the root cause of material existence. He says, this one's attachment for hearing about thus one's attachment for hearing about material things, which is hearing about material things, which is the root cause of one's material existence, vanishes. So one has to just replace this attachment of hearing about material things by hearing about Krishna's childhood pastimes. And this is actually the section which is describing Krishna's childhood pastimes. But this is the way he's trying to catch the attention of his audience. Just to give you one more example, I've gone across time, but one more example, and I have to narrate this because this is what I'm working on. And Prabhupada actually in the 5th canto, very interesting. I just mentioned it last time in the lecture, but I'm just going into slightly more details. He's translating this word ghatika as 30 minutes. I searched across all scriptures, literally the whole Wikipedia, the whole Google. Nowhere ghatika has been translated as 30 minutes. The best that the scholars do today is translates Ghatika as 24 minutes. Now, Prabhupada translates Ghatika as 30 minutes and 24 minutes both. Very interesting. I thought probably, and the third canto, the ninth verse actually gives the description of a copper pot, which can be made with a hole, and you could put this copper pot in the water, and the time it takes to sink actually describes the Ghatika. And Prabhupada writes there 30 minutes. In the 21st chapter of the 5th canto, he translates Ghatika at one place, in the 4th verse as 30 minutes, in the 10th verse as 24 minutes. He writes there actually in the word-to-word translation, he says half an hour, and then he writes in the backsheet, actually 30 minutes, actually 24 minutes. But just 6 verses before, he's writing 24 minutes, 30 minutes. And then again in the 9th verse of the 11th chapter of the 3rd canto, where the copper pot is actually being described, he's writing 30 minutes. And then he uses English conversion figures, describing the weight of the copper pot. It says pala, and he translates it into ounces. Then it's saying prastha, and Prabhupada is not giving any translation for prastha. Very interesting. And then he translates Ghatika as 30 minutes. I thought, and I went through all the Acharya's commentaries. Definitely, they do not know what are ounces and what are grams and what are minutes. It didn't exist during that time. So I thought, okay, probably it's there in Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Sri Gaudiya Bhashya or the Srimad Bhagavatam. And I do not know Bengali, so I don't know where is Achyutanand Prabhu is not there. So I caught hold of him, and I took the Bengali translators to him. He can read the Bengali. For me, it's all just like black dots. I can't really make out anything about it. So I asked, Achyutanand Prabhu, can you read the Bengali? He said, I can read. He said, can you read these verses for me? I just wanted to know if Bhaktisiddhanta Thakur is actually using those English conversions. He's not. He's not using ounces. He's not using minutes. So I do not know from where the Prabhupada has actually come to this. But when I read the Sanskrit commentary of Vishwanath Charit Thakur and Sridhar Swami, they give an indication to a mathematical calculation. So generally, there are 30 muhurats in a day. And a muhurat is half. The Ghatika is half of a muhurat. Now the Srimad Bhagavatam, the verses say, they define the Ghatika, and then they say muhurat is twice Ghatika. But they do not say how many muhuratas are there in a day. They skip that part. There is no mention of it. They say that there are 4 prahars in a day and 4 prahars in a night. And the prahar, each prahar is either made of 6 or 7 Ghatikas. Very interesting. 6 or 7. I mean, this is no mathematics. If you want to be precise, you can't say 6 or 7. It has either to be 6 or 7. So Vishwanath Charit Thakur clarifies this. He says, when the days are shorter, it is 6 Ghatikas. And when the days are longer, it's 7 Ghatikas. I said, okay. So if you take longer days, so 4 prahars, so 6 Ghatikas for a shorter day and 7 Ghatikas for a longer day. So you have 6 into 4, 24, and 7 into 4, 28. So you get 52 Ghatikas for 24 hours. That still does not give you 30 minutes. So why is Prabhupada translating 30 minutes? So the only way I could do it is actually make the pot. And mind you, I thought it will be an easy thing, but it took me 1 month to even figure out what it actually meant in terms of the measurement. So, but finally I could, and it comes exactly 30 minutes. You put the pot in the water, it comes 30 minutes. I said, but mathematically, how do you prove? Practically it's fine. And then Sridhar Swami interestingly mentions in his commentary, he says, when you calculate the Ghatika, kindly minus the 2 Ghatikas of dawn and dusk. So that means the 52 Ghatikas, you are supposed to minus 4 Ghatikas and then equate them to 24 hours. So then you have 48 Ghatikas in 24 hours. That gives you exactly 30 minutes. And I was like, wow, this is amazing. And I'm sure Prabhupada didn't actually make a pot to actually find out what it is. I don't know from where he got this brilliant idea of making Ghatika into 30 minutes. But then he also uses Ghatika as 24 minutes. The interesting point is the 11th chapter of the 3rd canto actually is taking earth and sun as the reference. So when you take earth and sun as the reference, then the Ghatika becomes 30 minutes. When you take the celestial sphere or add the moon as the reference in terms with the earth and the sun, then it gives 24 minutes. Why? Because you have a 24-hour zodiac circle. So the sun in relation to the earth takes 24 hours to make a circle, right? So then the circle becomes of 24 hours. Tithi is defined as the 12 degrees that the moon makes in relation to the sun's longitude in terms with the earth. So 12 degrees on a 24-hour circle becomes 48 minutes. That is becomes 48 minutes. That's a muhurta. Half of muhurta is a ghatika. That is 24 minutes. So when you are taking ghatika in relationship to sun and earth, it becomes 30 minutes. As soon as you take it in reference to the zodiac sign or the moon, it becomes 24 minutes. And this is only what Prabhupada's purports specify. It's not only the compassion of Prabhupada's heart, but he's being so true to the Acharyas, so true to what the Acharya is saying, it's unbelievable. I mean, it's beyond words, it's astounding. And, I really wanted to take what the purport is saying in terms of traveling and in certain highlights. And the whole point of, highlighting this aspect of traveling is to experience the variegatedness. And what is that you experience? What is that really, hits your heart in these experiences? What astounds you? And Prabhupada then writes, you don't actually, even if you're a sannyasi, you don't actually have to do all this traveling all alone. To experience the variegatedness of the Lord, to strengthen your mind, and to take shelter of the, to increase your faith in the Supreme Personality of God. And so many points, actually 8 or 10 points I had written, but I'm not taking those. The point is, he says, if one simply hears and chants the literature of the 6 Goswamis, that is good enough. He'll be equally astounded, equally taken aback, equally experience the same, the strengthening of the mind, the faith, the dependence on the Supreme Personality of Godhead, and experience the same Lord in the heart. Exactly what Sri Narad Muni is doing here by traveling alone in the forest can be experienced just by taking shelter of this beautiful pastime, this beautiful, bathing yourself in this beautiful pastimes of Krishna, in the lake of the pastimes of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. The rivers of the pastimes of Krishna that actually flow through the lakes of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, taking shelter of these books of the 6 Goswamis, specifically of the purports of Srila Prabhupada, and you'll be astounded beyond words of how you can experience Krishna the way Srila Prabhupada has translated. Hare Krishna. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Sorry, I just got a bit too awkward. Hare Krishna. Thank you.